It's interesting, when I heard your hot take with John Cutler on the Instagramification of product management, I just sat there and said, no, I think I got to pipe in on this one here. So while I don't disagree with what you and John talked about in terms of the Instagramification here of our beloved product management process, I do feel the conversation didn't drive to the point of some of the causes there. And I think there are some causes I want to sort of unpack with you, with like 3 categories of those of us in the product community who are guilty of making this situation happen. 3 myths we probably need to debunk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of One Night in Product Hot Takes Edition, where I interview a diverse cast of characters from around the world, pick a topic that's on their mind and get straight to the point. Speaking about getting straight to the point, this episode is sponsored by June. Now, if you know me, you'll know I'm all about B2B products, and I also love getting into the data to find out how my products are doing. But like just about everything else in product management, B2B and B2C just seem to hit different. Enter June, a customer analytics platform that enables B2B SaaS companies to understand and act on their product usage. You can use their auto-generated reports to double-click on why people aren't activating, why they're churning, what features to double down on next, and much, much more. You can check them out at onenightinproduct.com/June and start meeting your customers today. But right now, let's get going without further ado with Dean Peters' Hot Take. All right, so I see in front of me a somewhat familiar face in a lovely blue room surrounded by vintage musical equipment, which I'm sure he's just popped out and got from the shop so he can look cool in front of all of us. But enough of me. I'm going to throw over to you. Who are you? What is it you do? Where are you based? And most importantly, what's your hot take?
Alrighty, I'm Dean Peters. I teach and coach product management with ProductSide after 20 years of product management and 10 years of engineering. I'm here in a little township right outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, known as Apex, North Carolina, the peak of good living. The data science tells us so because it says so on all 3 of our water towers that we are indeed the peak of good living. And it's interesting, when I heard your hot take with John Cutler on the Instagramification of product management, I just sat there and said, no, I think I got to pipe in on this one here. So, some things just to keep in mind as we, have this conversation here. I'm older than silt, as you can tell. So while Jeff Patton describes himself as older than dirt, I am older than the thing dirt becomes when it's no longer dirt, and that's silt. So again, right now I'm taking advantage of that, sending the ladder down, becoming useful to people instead of yelling at little children to keep off my lawn. But really what I'm trying to do is come from not a point of just a lot of crap ton of in the trenches experience, and not just a boatload of constantly talking and training and study, but I've, over the years seen, heard, and eaten my fair share of product management silt. Okay. So while I don't disagree with what you and John talked about in terms of the Instagramification here of our beloved product management process, I do feel the conversation didn't drive to the point of some of the causes there. And I think there are some causes I want to sort of unpack with you, with like 3 categories of those of us in the product community who are guilty of making this situation happen. 3 myths we probably need to debunk, and, explain how we got from just a few years ago, everyone talking about imposter syndrome, and now the conversations around the Instagramification, self-loathing silt we are all experiencing, if you want to put it that way. So let me give the list of the offenders first, and then we can unpack them if you want. All right. So first, we're going to talk about the A-listers, the product management influencers. I'm going to get into each one of them in a second, but rest assured, I am dropping names. Okay.
Oh, I'm here for this. I'm here for this. Yeah, this is going to be the episode that puts the podcast into the stratosphere for the first time,
or at least has us looking, for new lines of work. Right here you go. Yeah, eating more silt. C-listers. That's us, individual contributors, the rank and file. We are, the people who have to endure and malpractice all these wonderful pontifications. And then I have what I call the F list, and that's those managers lacking leadership skills. And yes, I've got 2 brand new dangerous animals of product management to unleash today as we talk about that. So those are my 3 categories. And now let's talk about the myths. Myth number 1, And this is what came to mind when I heard you all talk. I'm riding my bicycle on the American Tobacco Trail, listening to both you talk, and I'm just getting hot. I'm just like, I'm pedaling. It was actually a very good ride. I thank you both for that because I was getting pissed off while I was riding. So first of all, the myth of the ultimate success. In other words, this idea that for you to, you need to be wildly successful in product management at the highest level to be knowledgeable, to pass along the knowledge. Now, I'm going to tell you from personal experience, I know a lot of great athletes and a lot of opera singers who are above average players and below average coaches. All right. I mean, we look at the ladder, we would sit there and when I was learning voice, we'd say, oh, sings like a bird. And that was a pejorative. It meant like, oh, well, they can make beautiful music, but they can't for the life of them tell you how they do it. They can't teach and they can't coach. So first of all, the fact that just because someone has done a great job at product management, I don't necessarily believe that they're a great coach or teacher. All right. And also, let's contrast that with the story that we find in the book, $1 Trillion Coach, right? Coach Campbell, who, a failed, and I mean a miserably failed American football coach who became the star mentor for Steve Jobs, Tim Cook, and Sheryl Sandberg. All right. So again, let's first of all get rid of that myth that you have to be, and then it's, the myth of celebrating a failure. We all talk a good show about that. But I think we're actually playing a lot of lip service to that. I think a lot of times we ignore those who fail. We don't give them as much a voice in the community as we say we should. We tell everyone else, oh, celebrate failure, learn from your failures. And yet when it gets down to it, that doesn't happen. I would suggest that when we start looking at annual reviews, we see that, we're dealing with lip service here. And then myth number 3, believe our own hype. Okay. And that's, many of us, right? We too often, all of us believe our own, what was that word I was looking for? Oh, silt. Yeah. As we, sell others, practices and methods that we often don't do that. I mean, I got out of opera singing because I didn't want to work with prima donnas. And now I look around places like LinkedIn and say, oh my God, look at all the prima donnas, So, yeah. So, went through those 3 categories, went through those, 3 myths there. I don't know. What do you feel like talking about some of our A-listers, or what do you want to go with this?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to say that I very strongly agree with this concept of, like, for example, the way I always try to put it, like Usain Bolt's coaching, sprint trainer, whoever it was, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but like he had never won the world record 100 meters, right, or any of those races. There was the Michael Jordan's coach who was like one of the most transformative people for him, and I don't think he ever played basketball in his life. I believe strongly and argue occasionally passionately about this, that you don't have to be a good player to teach how to play the game, and that being a good player doesn't necessarily, you could have been an amazing VP or chief product officer for 20 years at one company that just worked at that one company in that one industry and done the most amazing job there, have no idea how to transfer that to other contexts or, have even a chance of making a difference anywhere else. So I'm 100% with you on that. I also think I do agree, at least in principle, with the other points, the fallacies that you call out.
Yeah.
But it would be doing my listeners a disservice for you not to start naming and shaming individual quasi-thought leaders. So I'm going to ask you to be somewhat respectful, but you can do your thing.
It's less of a name and shame. So I'm going to list some of the top, the AA, the double A listers here. I'm actually not going to paint them in a bad light, but I got 3 questions I'd like to ask each of them. So let me walk through the list. For example, starting with Marty Kagan, who we know assiduously visits all these successful companies and marvelously translates how they inspire, empower, and transform us from learning their practice. Nothing wrong with that, but there's some gaps. I'll get into those. Melissa Perry, who doesn't love Melissa? All right, she splendidly talks about strategic leadership and guides us from being Jira-slinging ticket monkeys to become those team of teams. And so there's not much to beat on that, but there are some gaps that I feel like lead to the Instagramification. Because again, they're painting these ideal pictures. They're painting these pictures here without creating some balance. Ken Norton, all right, always laser focused on influence without authority. Or our very own John Cutler, or somewhere between Immanuel Kant and Ludwig von Bertalanffy, our philosopher of product management, who was constantly pondering the chaos and complexity of this world we live in. And again, it's not that I want to cast shade on them or drop them down, but got some questions every time I think about them. It's like, first of all, why are we talking to more failures? Why do we always I've talked to the top 25 companies here and learned from them, and you should do it just like them. And I said, that's fine. I think I'd like a little bit of balance. I think I want to hear from somebody who tried it and got close, but no cigar, or someone who failed miserably. I mean, if we're going to sit there and talk about learning from failure, why are we just talking to the success stories?
But who buys that book, though? Like, who goes out and buys the book?
That's the problem. I actually have that note here. It's like, yeah, but the problem is nobody buys the book about the failure. So that's part of it.
And some people will sit there, though, and they'll say, and I've heard specifically say, oh, well, they're just writing these books so that they can make loads of money and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, I'm not going to sit there and say that they're giving these books away for free.
Right.
On the other hand, I'm also sure that there's plenty of other ways to make money that aren't as onerous as writing a book. So
yeah,
I guess.
So where's the balance? Where's the balance here? So in other words, I want to hear some failures here. Okay, I mean, you think about Gibson Biddle. I saw him speak at Pandemonium 2019 in person. He talks about a portion of his career as wallpapering over his resume to speak to a path of learning that eventually led him to his Netflix success. Right? I'd like to dig into some of those, so there is a way to do this with some balance. All right. Again, and part of this may be, and here's another point. Here's another question. Why do we often talk to the Mang stars or the unicorn founders? We're going to talk to this person here. They worked at, Meta, Apple, Amazon, Netflix and Google all within the span of 6 years. And are now at a startup that's, gotten, B funding for this much here. And we're all just going I'm just working for this insurance company down the road. So, all these aspirations you're painting for me. So I think some of it has to do with myopia on just Mang stars and what I call unicornies. And then, again, the problem is, why do all these PM books and podcasts for individual contributors fail as well? You were asking about, hey, we can't write books. And the same thing, I would imagine that somebody has done some podcasts on individual contributors and have not reaped the benefit here. So I don't know how to solve for that problem. I'm just saying we don't have a balanced picture here.
So that's the A-listers. And of course, we've all got our own favorite A-lister. I was earlier on today called a fourth-rate Marty Kagan fanboy. So I guess I'm a D-lister now. So that's fine.
Marvelous.
But, I'm also curious now about the C-listers. I mean, we're skipping B. How are the C-listers contributing to this? Like people like you and me, I guess.
Yeah, so let's bridge this. Let's talk. So, for example, I would love to hear Marty Kagan talk to someone like Lenny podcast on someone who got laid off and then had to take a survival job and then had to claw their way back into product management, which I think might be relevant to some of us. So let's talk about these C-listers, those of us in the trenches, because we contribute to this self-loathing as well. And I think the first one's the short order cook product manager. You all did touch on this a little bit. I call it the Jira slinging ticket monkey. It's the person who reads the book about, cooking cuisine and then they're there flipping burgers. And some of them do it and they're like, hey, look, just tell me what tickets to write. And many of them are burnt out and miserable because of it. So we got the short order cooks. We got the struggling strategists. They work really hard, but they overload their backpack with a bunch of bricks. Oh, let me put another book in here. Let me try doing all these 5 things at once. And, they just become overwhelmed with that. And then I got the brilliant in theory people. So, they've read the book and now they're putting out all these, blog posts on it and they speak loudly like a PhD on souffle recipes. And then when you go watch the video, the surveillance video in their kitchen, they're burning it all down, as they try to, can't even make scrambled eggs. So again, it raises some questions here. And first of all, why do we as individual contributors or, mid-level directors or whatever you want to call us, why do we always feel compelled when we read the book to quickly go out there and emulate that? It's a new trend. Let me go out and do this. I mean, if you were and I to somehow get a hashtag started on some practice of product, how much, practice would you see saying, well, you need to work this into your practice?
Well, it's funny because I remember talking to John about that, and there's this kind of concept of the knowledge Kanban board where you're going out and you're loading up all of these different books or the things that you've learned from the books and the frameworks and all that stuff. You're like loading them up into your in progress column, but you're never moving anything to done because you're just addicted to learning versus actually doing.
Yeah, well, and I find that with some of the classes I teach here, I'll get at some point, I can see the person thinking like, okay, I've taken this training and now they're starting to fry their brain. How do I boil the ocean with all this? And I'm trying to say, don't boil the ocean. The first thing, take a little teapot, take 3 of the things. In fact, just pick 3 things you want to boil over the next 90 days. Don't try taking all and say, take that one thing over the next 30 days and see if you can bring that to a boil, right? Then the next, I said, I don't try. And so that's another question I want to ask is what makes us think we can boil the ocean? All right. So that's one thing here. The self-loathing. Why do we undervalue our own experience? Well, I never worked in a man company. I was never a unicorn founder. So, and I'd suggest that many of these people who we lift up sometimes, they may not be practicing what they preach. Like I said, if their surveillance video was on. So just some questions for those of us, as individual contributors. I think we do contribute it with, as you said, our addiction to learning. That was that one character who's the PhD. And then, so you've got the overwhelmed learner, the PhD, and then you just got the short order cook. And I think all of us in those degrees contribute to that. But then let me get into my third category. And these are the people that boil my tea kettle much faster. All right. And let's talk about managers who aren't leaders. And it's interesting. It used to upset me when I was working in product, and it gets under my skin when I'm teaching, when I encounter this as well. We got the hippo, right? We all know about that coming top down here and just like, I already know everything about everything. And the only thing worse than them is the zebra, who's basically what I call doing, magic 8-ball, a type of dictating where there's zero evidence, but really arrogant. And so they shout the loudest. But I got a couple new animals. And one of the ones that cooks my goose is the ostrich. So they send their team to training, but they don't take any of the training themselves. Or they go to the training and are multitasking. This contrast, I've just been teaching some cohorts where the managers were actively involved in not only the learning, but as they went into their breakout groups, I heard them and watched them teach. I would imagine those are going to be incredibly high-performing teams because they were the antithesis of that ostrich. And they reached down there and they were mentoring their. I'm thinking like these people are going to go places. And so, but I also have seen the ostrich. I've worked at places where I've seen a VP of product get training for everyone else. And I think of one large organization specifically where they sent us to training. They didn't attend any of the training and then bemoaned loudly while we were engaged in certain practices and couldn't understand it. That one bugs me, but not as much as the jackal. All right. And that's the one who dictates unfunded mandates, lays off people. And for those few survivors, we provide them no training on how to get things done. They really burn my bridge there. So just them, and I have some questions for them. So why are they the ones always trying to boil the ocean by installing frameworks? Hey, I'll just slap this on like a daggone Band-Aid. Let's install safe, zippity doodah. We'll get it done there. That's one that bugs me. Why do they sell us down the river with short-term demands? Well, we got to keep the lights on here. Oh, we got to just do it this once. Well, it's just a small fix. I mean, we all heard it. And there's sometimes we have to keep the lights on. But if it's always an emergency, it's never really an emergency. Right? And then why do some of these leaders resist change? The same place I had that jackal of that mix between an ostrich and a jackal vice president there, I went with data and they're like, that's not enough data. And, as opposed to, and I turned around, didn't help my career there. I said, well, I'd be glad to look at contrary data, which of course they had none. I mean, but I already knew I was on my way out the door there. And then finally, why don't these managers who are not leaders yet, why don't they practice what they preach? So just some thoughts and some questions.
Well, lots of questions, but in our last little moment together today,
Yeah.
like, I'm going to have to ask you for at least one answer. Like, what are we going to do about all of this stuff? Like, what should we do? How should we embrace the chaos, survive the carnage, and try and make a little bit of progress without beating ourselves up and maybe defeat some of those animals?
So as we get together and put out our newsletter called This Monstrous Mess, sorry, John, and you and I create a framework from which we can make millions and millions of dollars. All right, so how do we move forward? How do we unpack this,
Yes.
right? So again, for the A-listers, hey, can you show some of the warts too? Can you talk to some of the people in the trenches, please? Can you take one of these topics you bring and put it in some practical terms, not just how it worked, but how an individual might actually get it done in the field? Part of my teaching is like when I walk through that, I will go to a lesson and say, all right, let's talk about how this might work in where your world there. So some balance, please. All right. Let's say, and in doing that, let's celebrate some resilience. Now, for the individual contributors, can we please focus on get more done by focusing on less? All right. Quit trying to boil the ocean. Quit looking down your own experience here. And please find your tribe. All right. If you are feeling down, there's a lot of us out there who've seen a lot of silt and are more than glad to talk about it and share our story. So even if there's not, profitable books out on that topic, I would imagine we could create communities of product manager group therapy, as I like to joke about it, where we actually do get through that. And for our managers who aren't leaders, can we please stop with the friend work frenzy, please? Can we please get into the long game? And would you please, by all means, lead by example? And as a bonus, enough with your own challenge. Why don't you be the first person to challenge your assumptions as opposed to waiting for others? So just my thoughts. Like I said, that's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it. Your mileage may vary.
Well, no, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think it should, at the very least, provoke some thoughts, right? Like, and I think that's the thing for me. Like, none of this stuff is perfect. We all know it's messy, but if we can at least get people to think, maybe challenge some biases or some assumptions, as you say, or challenge the status quo, then, my kind of calling or clarion cry is better is always better than not better, right? So how can we make things just a little bit better step by step?
Well, it's like tell people when I say, I'm afraid to ask, I'm like, well, you're already at no now. So what do you got to lose?
Exactly.
And I think the same thing here. We're already at a point of, what do you call it? This monstrous mess or this, some of these feelings here. What's the worst we could possibly do to the, well, I shouldn't ask that question, but I'll ask what's the worst we could possibly do to this situation by sitting there and unpacking it a bit? Yeah, I would imagine it could. I would imagine that our overlords can find some other interesting ways of making our lives very interesting.
Something AI. But anyway, where can people find you after this if they want to continue the debate?
Well, the nice thing about being older than Silt is I got to early adopt. So LinkedIn, Dean Peters. Gmail, Dean Peters. Any of these channels, I'm the one who was able to get Dean Peters on that. So you can reach me anywhere if you really, if you want to talk about some of the training we do. I'm over at productside.com. Glad to talk, glad to learn, glad to run some therapy sessions for y'all.
Well, sounds like a fair offer, and hopefully some people will come and take it up. But as for now, obviously, always delighted to speak. But as for now, thanks for your hot take.
Hey, Jason, thanks so much. I appreciated the morning kvetch.